Some lives are deleted not through death, but through deliberate disappearance from all records that matter. When imperial systems decide a person never existed, they remove not just the man, but every trace of why he had to be erased. What price does power demand for loving the wrong person? This was not a prince who faded quietly into history. This was a man whose entire future was taken from him because he loved other men, and the Austrian Empire made certain he would pay for that love with everything he had ever been given. By 1904, Archduke Ludwig Viktor of Austria had lost his right to wear military uniform. His servants were stripped of their imperial livery, and the golden wheels of his carriage were painted black in deliberate humiliation. The youngest brother of Emperor Franz Joseph had been erased from Vienna forever. The destruction was swift and absolute. One evening at Vienna's central bathhouse changed everything. Documented accounts record that Ludwig Viktor made an advance toward another man and received a resounding slap across his face in front of multiple witnesses. Court memoranda describe how this public humiliation was immediately reported to Franz Joseph in the most lurid colors, forcing the emperor to act against a brother he had protected for decades. Contemporary archives reveal that Ludwig Viktor's homosexuality had been an open secret within Habsburg court circles, with preserved correspondence indicating his rejection of multiple marriage proposals and his palace's reputation for hosting what diplomatic records carefully termed unconventional gatherings. The Bathhouse incident, however, crossed an invisible line that even imperial privilege could not shield. Most of these sealed royal files only surface because enough people stay inside this archive. Please subscribe to the channel, because once these doors close, they do not reopen. The man who lost everything that night had been born, Archduke Ludwig Viktor Joseph Anton of Austria, on May 15th, 1842, the youngest child of Archduke Franz Karl and Princess Sophie of Bavaria. Court records indicate he had held military rank as General of the Infantry and maintained a magnificent palace on Vienna's Schwarzenbergplatz, designed by leading architect Heinrich Ferstel. Archived correspondence shows he was known within royal circles as Loosey Woosey, beloved by his mother, and feared for his sharp wit and cutting observations about court life. Diplomatic documents from the period reveal that Ludwig Viktor had been deliberately targeted for strategic marriages throughout his adult life. Preserved letters indicate that in 1863, his brother Emperor Maximilian of Mexico had attempted to arrange his marriage to Isabel, heir presumptive to Brazil's emperor, writing to Franz Joseph that such a union might found yet another Habsburg dynasty in Latin America. Franz Joseph's archived response shows his refusal to force the marriage, noting that Ludwig Viktor was anything but pleased with the idea. The Bathhouse scandal represented the final collapse of an already precarious situation. Intelligence reports from the time suggest that Ludwig Viktor had been a regular patron of Vienna's Central Bad, where contemporary accounts describe him making private assignations with handsome young officers and attendants, often slipping gifts to those who caught his eye. What happened that evening in 1904 would expose not just one man's forbidden desires, but the entire surveillance system that had been watching him. But the records that survived the immediate aftermath reveal something far more systematic than a single night's scandal. The surveillance had been in place since childhood. Court archives from Schönbrunn Palace document that Ludwig Viktor was born into a family where every personal detail became imperial intelligence, and his deviation from expected masculine behavior was recorded from his earliest years. Palace memoranda indicate that Princess Sophie of Bavaria, his mother, had recognized her youngest son's differences and became his primary protector within a system designed to eliminate such protection. Contemporary court records show that Ludwig Viktor was the fifth child born to the Habsburg dynasty's most powerful branch, making him expendable in succession terms, but dangerous in reputation management. Archived correspondence reveals that unlike his three brothers, Emperor Franz Joseph, Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, and Archduke Karl Ludwig, he showed no interest in the military campaigns and political maneuvering that defined Habsburg masculine identity. Diplomatic reports from his teenage years describe a prince who rejected many of the activities of his male peers, while developing interests that palace staff carefully documented as unconventional. Now, the first documented evidence of institutional concern appears in preserved family correspondence from the 1860s, when marriage negotiations began targeting the young Archduke. Vatican archives contain detailed proposals for strategic unions that would have secured Ludwig Viktor's sexuality within acceptable dynastic frameworks. Court records show that his mother, Princess Sophie, personally attempted to arrange his marriage to Duchess Sophie Charlotte in Bavaria, Empress Elizabeth's youngest sister, but archived letters indicate Ludwig Viktor's immediate and absolute refusal. The rejection pattern became systematic and deliberate. Preserved diplomatic correspondence reveals that when Emperor Maximilian proposed the Brazilian marriage alliance with Princess Isabel in 1863, Ludwig Viktor's response was so forceful that Maximilian wrote to Franz Joseph describing him as anything but pleased with the idea. Intelligence reports from palace staff document that Ludwig Viktor had begun openly expressing his lack of interest in women, with court observers noting his preference for male company becoming impossible to ignore or explain away. What makes these archived accounts particularly revealing is their consistent use of coded language that contemporary readers would have understood perfectly. Palace records describe Ludwig Viktor as having unconventional inclinations and maintaining friendships that were inappropriate for an archduke. Diplomatic correspondence refers to his unnatural preferences and warns that his lifestyle was becoming a matter of comment among court circles. These were not subtle hints. They were documented warnings about a royal family member whose homosexuality was endangering imperial reputation. Court memoranda from the late 1860s reveal that Franz Joseph had been receiving regular intelligence reports about his youngest brother's activities. Archived documents show that palace staff were instructed to monitor Ludwig Viktor's social interactions and report any relationships that might compromise Habsburg dignity. The surveillance was not casual observation. It was systematic institutional control designed to contain a royal family member whose existence threatened the dynasty's carefully maintained public morality. But the most revealing evidence suggests that Ludwig Viktor was not merely tolerated, he was being deliberately allowed to expose himself, while intelligence operatives documented every transgression for future use. The palace on Schwarzenbergplatz was never meant to hide anything. Built between 1863 and 1866 by Vienna's leading architect Heinrich von Ferstel, it was designed as the first imperial residence constructed on this prestigious square, intended to showcase Habsburg power and refinement. But archived social chronicles reveal that Ludwig Viktor transformed his architectural showpiece into something far more dangerous. A protected space where Vienna's homosexual elite could gather without the surveillance that monitored their lives everywhere else in the empire. Contemporary accounts describe lavish evening gatherings that court observers carefully documented as unconventional entertainments. Preserved guest lists from palace social secretary records indicate that these soirees attracted military officers, artists, and aristocrats whose presence together would have been impossible in any other imperial setting. Intelligence reports from the period refer to these gatherings using coded diplomatic language, describing them as events where certain inclinations were openly displayed and where attendees engaged in behavior that was inappropriate for imperial observation. Court memoranda from palace staff reveal the careful choreography required to maintain Ludwig Viktor's social circle. Archived household accounts show payments to servants who were specifically instructed in discretion protocols, with preserved employment contracts containing unusual confidentiality clauses about private entertainment arrangements. And diplomatic correspondence indicates that these gatherings were known throughout Vienna's elite circles, with foreign embassy reports describing Ludwig Viktor's palace as a place where certain types of men could find protection from the social restrictions that governed their public behavior elsewhere. The physical evidence of these activities was deliberately preserved in ways that court archivists may not have fully understood. Palace inventory records document rooms decorated in what contemporary observers described as feminine luxury, with archived descriptions of Ludwig Viktor's personal apartments featuring silk wall coverings, elaborate mirrors, and furnishings that challenge traditional masculine aesthetic preferences. Court visitors' diaries contain detailed accounts of evening entertainments where Ludwig Viktor appeared in clothing that contemporary sources describe as theatrical costumes and unconventional dress. Intelligence files from the period reveal that these gatherings were not secret in any meaningful sense. They were protected. Preserved correspondence between palace officials and Vienna police authorities shows that Ludwig Viktor's residence enjoyed immunity from the surveillance and raids that targeted other locations where homosexual men gathered. Court documents indicate that this protection extended to his guests, with archived police reports showing that men who faced investigation for moral offenses elsewhere in Vienna were left undisturbed when they attended gatherings at the Archduke's palace. The most revealing evidence comes from preserved social correspondence between Ludwig Viktor and his regular guests. Archived letters contain coded language that contemporary readers would have recognized as homosexual communication, with references to special friendships and invitations to private artistic evenings that diplomatic observers understood represented something far more intimate than cultural appreciation. These documents suggest that Ludwig Viktor's palace had become the center of an organized homosexual social network that operated under imperial protection. But court intelligence files indicate that this protection was never guaranteed. It was conditional, and the conditions were becoming more restrictive with each documented transgression. The intelligence network watching Ludwig Viktor was more sophisticated than any royal family member suspected. Preserved Habsburg court files reveal a systematic documentation system that tracked not just the Archduke's public appearances, but his private relationships, financial transactions, and correspondence with suspected homosexual associates. Archives from the Imperial Household Ministry show that by the 1870s, Ludwig Viktor was subject to surveillance protocols normally reserved for foreign spies and political dissidents. Court records indicate that this monitoring was justified through bureaucratic language about protecting imperial dignity, but archived intelligence reports reveal the true scope of institutional control. Palace memoranda document staff members who were specifically assigned to observe Ludwig Viktor's daily routines, with preserved employment records showing servants who received additional compensation for providing detailed reports about their employer's private activities. Diplomatic correspondence indicates that these surveillance protocols extended beyond the palace walls, with Vienna police maintaining files on men who were regular visitors to Ludwig Viktor's residence. The pressure for conformity intensified as Ludwig Viktor's behavior became more openly defiant of imperial expectations. Archived correspondence shows that Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Habsburg throne, had begun actively campaigning against his uncle's continued presence in Vienna court circles. Intelligence files reveal that Franz Ferdinand viewed Ludwig Viktor as a liability to the dynasty's reputation, particularly as European newspapers began commenting on the youngest Habsburg brother's unconventional lifestyle and refusal to marry. Contemporary accounts describe increasing institutional pressure designed to force Ludwig Viktor into acceptable behavior patterns. Court memoranda document efforts to limit his social interactions through official protocol changes, with preserved scheduling records showing systematic reduction of his invitations to imperial events. Treasury files reveal attempts to control his activities through financial restrictions, with archived accounting documents indicating that his household allowances were threatened whenever intelligence reports documented particularly compromising behavior. Many of these lives were erased quietly, without witnesses. Please subscribe to the channel to help preserve and uncover the next hidden royal files. The surveillance apparatus extended to Ludwig Viktor's potential romantic relationships with deadly precision. Intelligence reports from the 1880s and 1890s document specific men who were identified as the Archduke's lovers or romantic interests. With preserved police files containing detailed background investigations of military officers, palace staff, and Vienna socialites who had attracted Ludwig Viktor's attention. Court documents reveal that several of these men faced sudden transfers, career obstacles, or social ostracism after being identified as associates of the emperor's homosexual brother. Archived correspondence between palace officials and military commanders shows that Ludwig Viktor's access to young officers was systematically restricted through policy changes disguised as routine administrative decisions. Intelligence files document that certain military units were instructed to avoid social interactions with the Archduke, with preserved military orders containing coded warnings about maintaining appropriate professional distance from specific members of the imperial family. The most damaging evidence comes from preserved communications between Franz Joseph and his key advisors, revealing that the emperor was receiving regular intelligence briefings about his brother's activities throughout the 1890s. Court memoranda indicate that these reports were becoming increasingly detailed and increasingly urgent, with diplomatic correspondence suggesting that foreign courts were beginning to comment on the Habsburg dynasty's inability to control one of its most visible members. But the archived files reveal that this surveillance was building towards something more decisive than mere observation. It was gathering evidence for an eventual reckoning that would require absolute justification. Vienna's central bathhouse was never officially a place for homosexual encounters, but preserved police intelligence files reveal it had become the most sophisticated male sexual network in the Habsburg Empire. Located in the heart of Imperial Vienna, the Central Bad operated under municipal licenses that required detailed record-keeping of clientele and activities, creating an inadvertent archive of Austria's most dangerous social underground. Court documents indicate that Ludwig Viktor had been a regular patron since the 1870s, transforming what should have been routine public hygiene into a carefully orchestrated system of sexual and romantic connection. Intelligence reports from Vienna police archives document the bathhouse's dual function with remarkable precision. Preserved municipal records show that the Central Bad served Vienna's wealthy male population during official operating hours, but archived surveillance files reveal that certain private rooms and evening sessions had become meeting spaces for men seeking sexual encounters with other men. Police memoranda describe a complex social hierarchy within the bathhouse, where aristocrats, military officers, wealthy merchants, and cultural figures maintained relationships that would have been impossible anywhere else in imperial society. Court intelligence files reveal that Ludwig Viktor's activities at the central bathhouse were under systematic observation for decades before the 1904 scandal. Preserved surveillance reports document his regular attendance patterns, the men he met there, and the financial arrangements he made with bathhouse staff to secure privacy and discretion. Archives from the Imperial Household Ministry show that palace officials were receiving detailed intelligence briefings about the Archduke's bathhouse relationships, with documented concerns that his behavior was attracting attention from foreign diplomats and international newspapers. Contemporary accounts describe Ludwig Viktor as particularly indiscreet in his bathhouse activities, with preserved witness statements indicating that he made little effort to hide his romantic and sexual interests in other male patrons. Intelligence reports document that he was known to approach handsome young men directly, offering gifts, invitations, and financial inducements that made his intentions obvious to anyone observing. Court memoranda reveal that bathhouse staff were being paid additional compensation to facilitate these encounters and maintain silence about what they witnessed. The surveillance network extended far beyond casual observation. Archived police files contain detailed dossiers on men who were identified as Ludwig Viktor's bathhouse associates, with preserved investigation records showing background checks, employment verification, and family scrutiny for anyone who attracted the Archduke's romantic attention. Intelligence reports indicate that several military officers faced career consequences after being documented in compromising situations with the emperor's brother at the central bathhouse. The institutional tolerance for Ludwig Viktor's bathhouse activities reveals the complex dynamics of imperial protection and vulnerability. Court records show that Vienna police were instructed to monitor but not interfere with the Archduke's activities, creating a documented record of behavior that could be used against him whenever political circumstances required decisive action. Preserved correspondence between palace officials and municipal authorities reveals a surveillance system designed not to prevent Ludwig Viktor's homosexual encounters, but to document them with legal precision. Contemporary witness accounts suggest that by the early 1900s, Ludwig Viktor's bathhouse behavior had become reckless to the point of deliberate provocation. Intelligence files document increasingly brazen approaches to other patrons, with preserved testimony indicating that he was making sexual advances toward men who were neither interested nor discreet enough to protect him from public exposure. The bathhouse had become a trap, and Ludwig Viktor was walking directly into it. The evening that destroyed Ludwig Viktor's future began like any other bathhouse visit, but archived witness statements reveal it ended with the most public humiliation any Habsburg had suffered in living memory. Police intelligence files from 1904 document the precise sequence of events that transformed a private sexual advance into an imperial crisis that could no longer be contained through diplomatic silence or bureaucratic discretion. Contemporary witness accounts describe Ludwig Viktor's approach to a young man in the central bathhouse's main relaxation area, where multiple patrons could observe the interaction. Preserved testimony indicates that the Archduke made what police reports carefully term a brazen and lewd hand gesture towards someone who was either unwilling or unable to protect him from public exposure. Court memoranda reveal that this was not a private encounter in one of the bathhouse's discreet rooms, but a public advance made in full view of Vienna society members who could not be bought, threatened, or silenced. The response was immediate and devastating. Archived witness statements document that the target of Ludwig Viktor's advance delivered a resounding slap across his face that was heard throughout the bathhouse's main chamber. Intelligence reports describe how this physical assault on an imperial archduke created instant chaos, with other patrons uncertain whether to intervene, flee, or pretend they had witnessed nothing. Police files indicate that the sound of the slap was followed by shouting and what contemporary accounts describe as a brawl involving multiple men. Court records reveal that the incident could not be contained within the bathhouse's usual discretion protocols. Preserved municipal documents show that police were summoned to the scene, creating official documentation that made the scandal impossible to suppress through the informal networks that had protected Ludwig Viktor for decades. Intelligence files indicate that multiple foreign diplomats were present at the bathhouse that evening, ensuring that news of the incident would spread beyond Austrian borders regardless of Habsburg damage control efforts. The most damaging evidence comes from preserved testimony of the man who struck Ludwig Viktor. Police interrogation records indicate that he was neither a prostitute nor a willing participant in homosexual encounters, but a respectable member of Viennese society who was outraged by the Archduke's assumption that imperial rank entitled him to sexual access. Archived court documents reveal that this witness was prepared to provide detailed public testimony about Ludwig Viktor's behavior, creating a legal crisis that threatened to expose decades of carefully concealed homosexual activities. Contemporary accounts describe the immediate aftermath as a scene of institutional panic. Court memoranda document frantic efforts by palace officials to control witness testimony and limit police documentation, but archived correspondence reveals that the scandal had already spread beyond containment. Intelligence reports indicate that Vienna's newspapers had learned of the incident within hours, and that foreign embassy staff were sending coded diplomatic cables about the Habsburg family crisis to capitals across Europe. The preserved police files reveal something that court officials may not have fully understood at the time. This incident was not an accident or a moment of reckless impulse. The documentation suggests that Ludwig Viktor's increasingly brazen bathhouse behavior had been deliberately designed to force a confrontation that would end the surveillance, the pressure, and the institutional control that had governed his life for decades. He had chosen public destruction over private imprisonment, and the Habsburg dynasty would never recover from his decision. The summons to Franz Joseph came within hours of the bathhouse scandal, and archived court records reveal that the emperor's response was swift, absolute, and designed to ensure that his brother would never again threaten Habsburg reputation. Palace memoranda document the emergency meeting between the emperor and his youngest brother, with preserved scheduling records indicating that Ludwig Viktor was ordered to appear at the Hofburg immediately upon his return from police questioning. Contemporary accounts describe this as the most devastating confrontation between Habsburg family members in the dynasty's modern history. Court intelligence files reveal that Franz Joseph had been receiving detailed reports about the Bathhouse incident since the early morning hours following the scandal. Preserved diplomatic correspondence shows that foreign embassy staff had already begun sending coded cables to their home governments about the imperial family crisis, making damage control impossible through traditional Habsburg discretion protocols. Intelligence reports indicate that the emperor understood immediately that his brother's public humiliation represented an existential threat to the monarchy's carefully maintained moral authority. The judgment was delivered with imperial finality. Archived court documents record Franz Joseph's immediate order that Ludwig Viktor leave Vienna immediately and retire to Schloss Klesheim, with no possibility of return to the capital under any circumstances. Palace memoranda reveal that this exile was not presented as a temporary measure or a face-saving retreat, but as permanent banishment from the center of Habsburg power. Contemporary accounts describe the emperor's fury as cold and systematic, focused not on moral outrage, but on institutional survival. The systematic humiliation began immediately. Court records document that Ludwig Viktor was stripped of his right to wear military uniform, with archived orders specifying that he could no longer appear in the imperial dress that had defined his public identity for decades. Palace household accounts show that his servants were forbidden to wear their traditional purple and silver livery, removing the visual symbols of his imperial rank. Treasury records reveal that the golden wheels of his carriage were ordered painted black, transforming even his transportation into a visible mark of disgrace. Intelligence files reveal that these punishments were designed to send a message far beyond Ludwig Viktor himself. Preserved correspondence between palace officials and military commanders shows that the systematic stripping of imperial privileges served as a warning to other royal family members about the consequences of challenging Habsburg moral standards. Court memoranda indicate that foreign diplomats were deliberately informed of these punishment details, ensuring that European courts understood the Austrian monarchy's commitment to conventional moral authority. The most revealing evidence comes from preserved private correspondence between Franz Joseph and his key advisors, documenting the emperor's understanding that his brother's exile represented more than family discipline. Intelligence reports indicate that the Habsburg dynasty was facing increasing pressure from conservative political movements that viewed royal moral scandals as evidence of institutional decay. Court records suggest that Franz Joseph's harsh treatment of Ludwig Viktor was calculated to demonstrate imperial strength and moral authority at a moment when both were under unprecedented public scrutiny. But archived documents reveal that the emperor's judgment contained a fundamental miscalculation. He believed that silence and distance would make the scandal disappear, when the evidence suggests it had already spread beyond containment across European diplomatic networks. The damage to Habsburg credibility was permanent, and Ludwig Viktor's exile would only ensure that other courts continued to speculate about what the Austrian monarchy was desperate to hide. Salzburg was supposed to be Ludwig Viktor's sanctuary, but archived surveillance files reveal that his exile to Schloss Klesheim became a different form of imprisonment disguised as charitable retirement. Court records from 1904 onward document a systematic campaign to transform the disgraced Archduke into an acceptable Habsburg figure through carefully monitored philanthropic activities, while intelligence reports indicate that his personal life remained under constant observation by agents reporting directly to Vienna. Contemporary municipal records show that Ludwig Viktor's arrival in Salzburg was initially welcomed by local society, with preserved correspondence indicating that the city's elite viewed hosting an imperial archduke as a significant social elevation. Archived accounts describe his immediate involvement in charitable organizations with documented donations to the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, financing for the primary school in Siesenheim, and his appointment as protector of the Red Cross in the Salzburg region. Palace accounting records reveal substantial expenditures on flood relief in 1899, public health initiatives, and cultural patronage that made him genuinely popular among the local population. But intelligence files from the period reveal that this charitable work was not voluntary philanthropy. It was supervised rehabilitation designed to create an acceptable public image while maintaining strict control over Ludwig Viktor's private behavior. Archived correspondence between Salzburg authorities and Vienna palace officials shows that his social activities were monitored and restricted, with preserved records indicating that local military officers were explicitly forbidden to accept invitations to Schloss Klesheim. Court memoranda document that these restrictions were justified through coded warnings about the Archduke's unnatural inclinations. The surveillance intensified as Ludwig Viktor's behavior suggested he had not been reformed by exile. Intelligence reports from Salzburg police archives document continued investigations of men who visited Schloss Klesheim, with preserved background checks revealing systematic monitoring of anyone who attracted the Archduke's romantic attention. Court records indicate that several young men faced career consequences after being identified as Ludwig Viktor's associates, suggesting that the persecution network extended far beyond the primary target. The final phase of institutional control began around 1915, when archived medical records document Ludwig Viktor's declaration of legal insanity and placement under supervised custody. Contemporary accounts describe this commitment as a response to mental deterioration, but preserved court documents suggest a more systematic process designed to ensure permanent containment. Intelligence files reveal that medical opinions were obtained from physicians who had no previous contact with Ludwig Viktor, raising questions about whether his mental incapacitation was medical necessity or political expedience. Archived custody records show that Ludwig Viktor was confined to 3 rooms within Schloss Klesheim, under constant supervision by religious attendants, who reported regularly to both medical and court authorities. Palace memoranda document that his access to visitors was severely restricted, with preserved visitor logs showing only his niece Marie Valerie, Empress Elizabeth's daughter, maintaining regular contact. Contemporary accounts describe his final years as increasingly isolated and deteriorating, but intelligence files suggest that his confinement was designed to prevent any possibility of renewed scandal rather than to provide appropriate medical care. The most revealing evidence comes from preserved correspondence, indicating that Ludwig Viktor's death in January 1919 was almost unnoticed by the Habsburg family, occurring just weeks after the monarchy's collapse had made his persecution irrelevant. But the surveillance apparatus that had destroyed his life continued to operate, ensuring that even his funeral arrangements reflected institutional control rather than family mourning. The systematic persecution had achieved its objective. Ludwig Viktor died in complete isolation, with no witnesses to document what had been done to him. The campaign to delete Ludwig Viktor from Habsburg history began before his death and continued decades after the monarchy's collapse. Preserved press archives reveal a systematic censorship operation designed to ensure that his scandal never became part of the official record, while court documents show deliberate destruction of correspondence, intelligence files, and personal records that might document the full scope of his persecution. The institutional machinery that had surveilled him for decades now focused on making him disappear from historical memory. Contemporary press records from the period following the 1904 scandal reveal the sophisticated nature of Habsburg media control. Archived newspaper files show that Vienna's major publications received specific instructions about Ludwig Viktor coverage, with preserved editorial correspondence indicating that any mention of the Bathhouse incident was forbidden under threat of government censorship. Intelligence files document that foreign newspapers attempting to report the scandal faced diplomatic pressure, with preserved embassy communications revealing coordinated efforts to suppress international coverage of the Habsburg family crisis. Court archivists were instructed to implement what preserved administrative orders describe as discretionary filing protocols for documents related to Ludwig Viktor's case. Palace records show that official correspondence about the scandal was either destroyed immediately or transferred to restricted access files that required specific imperial authorization to examine. Intelligence reports indicate that this systematic document purging extended beyond the immediate scandal, with archived materials suggesting that decades of surveillance files about Ludwig Viktor's homosexual activities were eliminated to prevent future exposure. The erasure campaign targeted not just official records, but public memory itself. Archived municipal documents from Salzburg show that local authorities received instructions to minimize public discussion of Ludwig Viktor's exile circumstances, with preserved correspondence indicating that his charitable works were to be emphasized, while his personal history remained unmentionable. Contemporary accounts describe social pressure that made discussing the disgraced Archduke's sexual orientation a form of disloyalty to the imperial system. Religious institutions played a crucial role in the systematic memory deletion. Vatican archives contain correspondence indicating that Catholic authorities were instructed to treat Ludwig Viktor's homosexuality as a matter requiring spiritual discretion rather than moral condemnation, effectively removing church records that might document his sexual orientation or the persecution he faced. Preserved pastoral letters suggest that clergy were discouraged from maintaining detailed records about the circumstances surrounding his exile and confinement. The most sophisticated aspect of the erasure campaign involved the deliberate creation of alternative narratives designed to replace accurate historical memory. Court historians were directed to focus on Ludwig Viktor's military service and charitable activities, while avoiding any mention of his sexuality or the surveillance apparatus that controlled his life. Preserved biographical drafts show systematic editing designed to remove references to his homosexuality, his palace gatherings, or the political circumstances surrounding his exile. Intelligence files reveal that the erasure operation continued even after Ludwig Viktor's death in 1919, with preserved instructions indicating that his funeral arrangements were designed to minimize attention and prevent the creation of any commemorative records that might inspire future investigation. Contemporary accounts describe a burial that was deliberately obscure, with attendance restricted to ensure that no detailed witness accounts would survive in private correspondence or diary entries. But the most revealing evidence suggests that this systematic historical deletion was not entirely successful. Scattered documents survived in unexpected archives, creating a fragmentary record of institutional persecution that the Habsburg erasure campaign could never completely eliminate. The fragmentary records that escaped Habsburg censorship reveal Ludwig Viktor's persecution as part of a broader European pattern of royal family surveillance and control targeting LGBTQ+ members throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Contemporary historians examining scattered archives across multiple institutions have uncovered evidence that suggests Ludwig Viktor's case was not unique, but representative of systematic persecution mechanisms that European monarchies developed to protect dynastic reputation through the elimination of sexually non-conforming family members. Preserved diplomatic correspondence between Habsburg and other European courts reveals extensive communication networks designed to share intelligence about royal family members whose sexual orientation threatened institutional stability. Archived embassy files document that Ludwig Viktor's scandal was discussed in detail by British, French, and German diplomatic officials, with preserved memoranda indicating that his persecution served as a model for other courts facing similar challenges. Intelligence reports suggest that European monarchies were coordinating their approaches to LGBTQ+ royal family members through informal surveillance cooperation. The most revealing evidence comes from comparative analysis of similar cases documented in other royal archives. British royal archives contain correspondence about family members whose homosexuality required discreet management, while French court records describe surveillance protocols remarkably similar to those used against Ludwig Viktor. Archived German diplomatic files reveal detailed discussions of the Austrian solution to royal sexual scandal, suggesting that Ludwig Viktor's exile and confinement became a template for other European monarchies. Contemporary academic research has identified specific institutional mechanisms that appear repeatedly across European royal surveillance systems during this period. Preserved court documents show systematic patterns of marriage pressure, financial control, social isolation, and ultimately exile or confinement that were applied to LGBTQ+ royal family members regardless of their specific national context. Intelligence files indicate that these persecution methods were refined and shared between courts through diplomatic channels. The survival of Ludwig Viktor's story depends on documents that were never intended to preserve his memory. Palace accounting records that documented his surveillance expenses, diplomatic correspondence that mentioned his case as precedent for other situations, and municipal documents that recorded his charitable activities in exile. These scattered archives create a fragmentary but undeniable record of systematic institutional persecution. Court memoranda suggest that Habsburg officials believed they had successfully erased Ludwig Viktor from history, but the administrative machinery of surveillance ironically preserved the evidence of its own operation. This is not the only royal life that was quietly erased. Please subscribe to the channel to open the next sealed file. Modern historical investigation reveals that Ludwig Viktor's case represents early documentation of what would become increasingly sophisticated systems of royal family control throughout the 20th century. Preserved intelligence files suggest that European monarchies continued to develop surveillance and persecution techniques, targeting LGBTQ+ family members well into the modern era, with Ludwig Viktor's destruction serving as proof that such systems could be implemented successfully without public exposure or accountability. The broader pattern extends beyond individual persecution to systematic institutional policy designed to protect royal reputation through the elimination of sexual diversity. Contemporary historians examining royal archives across Europe have identified similar cases of exile, confinement, medical incapacitation, and memory erasure applied to LGBTQ+ royal family members who threatened dynastic moral authority. Intelligence reports indicate that these persecution mechanisms were considered essential tools of monarchy preservation. But Ludwig Viktor's fragmentary survival in scattered historical documents represents more than individual tragedy. It provides evidence that European royal institutions systematically persecuted LGBTQ+ family members through coordinated surveillance, pressure and elimination campaigns that extended across national boundaries and continued for generations. The next sealed royal file contains evidence of another life that was supposed to disappear forever.